Hi, everybody. Welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. In this video, we're going to talk about the church administration building, and there's a room inside this building called the Onyx Room. And that's how I came across this article. I was looking into onyx. We'll get to that in just a second. And I was just kind of going through this article, and there's so many interesting things that I want to share with you, things that I didn't know before. I thought this was fascinating, so I'm glad that I found this. If you don't know what the church administration building is, this is the building that has all the offices for the First Presidency, the Quorum of the 12, and other general authorities. When you're in downtown Salt Lake, you have Temple Square. Here on the west side, here's the temple, here's the tabernacle. And then you have this block to the east, and that's also owned by the church, and it has a number of different buildings. And one of them is the administration building. It's this one right here. So this is what we're talking about. Okay, so onyx. Why was I looking into that? It's because we were talking about hurricane beryl, and beryl is one of the gemstones found on the breastplate of the high priest. Someone sent me an email, thinking that there might be a connection somehow. And as we were looking at this, we were talking about onyx, which, according to the Temple Institute, they believe that onyx is the stone that corresponds with Joseph. So the breastplate would be not the 12 tribes of Israel, but the 12 sons. At least that's what that's the conclusion that they came to. It's not really explicitly said in the scriptures whether it's the sons or the tribes. I think that you could, look at it both ways. But what you have is you have a stone for each son, including Levi, and then instead of having one for Ephraim and Manasseh separately, they're combined, and it's just for Joseph, and it's this one right here. It's the onyx stone, and then what's interesting is that you have these two stones that are worn on the shoulders. In fact, they have a picture of it right here because they've recreated all these things. And on the shoulders, this is what's clear in the scriptures. It explicitly says to have these two stones, and on one, it's supposed to have all the names of the sons of Israel, or Jacob, and then the 6 other ones on the other shoulder, and it's supposed to be in birth order. And so the idea is that that's the same order for the breastplate, although it doesn't explicitly say that. And so you have this kind of thing going on where, if they're correct, Joseph is onyx, and then on the shoulders, you have onyx. So there's this kind of like triangle right here, like upside down triangle. It's symmetrical. There's probably more to it, but there's not more that I could find. But all I can do is just notice that you have those 3 onyx stones, whereas the other sons are represented with other stones. Also, this is just a little tangent. I was reading through here about the ephod, which is this right here. Okay, it's this thing that goes around the waist, and when you go down here, and it's explaining it, it says the most important garment worn by the high priest is the ephod. Its appearance can be likened to an apron. I had never thought about that before, so let's look at that again. Yep, it looks like an apron, but like backwards. Has these 2 straps that go up to the shoulders. So I think that's pretty neat, don't you? Okay, so anyway, when you look in the scriptures, the onyx stone comes up a few times. One of the first times it shows up is at the very beginning, Genesis 2, verse 12, where it says, I'll just read it. Now I've prepared with all my might. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. And the gold of that land is good. There is bdellium and the onyx stone. And it doesn't explain why that's significant, why that's being pointed out, but it is. The other times that it shows up, it's talking about the breastplate and the shoulder stones of the high priest. Here you can see it here in Exodus and a bunch of different places. It comes up in First Chronicles, talking about bringing together all the all the material to build the temple. It comes up in Job one time. It just says the precious onyx. And then in Ezekiel. You have Moses, but that's just the Genesis account in Moses. And then it comes up in Ezekiel when it's talking about Jerusalem and the different gateways or the different entrances for the 12 tribes, and it mentions onyx because that's one of the stones. Okay, so if they're right about this, that onyx represents Joseph, so I guess Ephraim and Manasseh together, then I think that makes this all the more interesting, what we're about to read. Okay, so let's go to this. Okay, it is one of the most recognizable structures in the church. It might be considered the nerve center for church headquarters. Yeah, where the first presidency and the quorum of the 12 apostles have their offices. So yeah, that would be the nerve center. But notwithstanding its import, the church administration building completed a century ago this year was never dedicated until 1974, following extensive remodeling. On the occasion of this centennial year for the building, the Church News was invited to tour and photograph its interior. And, we've seen inside it a number of times because there's a lot of church news articles and newsroom articles that come up where there's pictures of like President Nelson meeting with dignitaries in like a conference room. We've seen pictures of his office. So it's not like it's a big secret or anything like that. But as far as I know, this article may be the best resource if you're really curious about what it looks like in there and all the details. There are a lot of interesting things to consider, like this. Alluding to Doctrine and Covenants 94, verses 3 through 12, Nielsen said, the building fulfilled in 1833 commandment that there be a house for the presidency, quote unquote. Okay, so let's read that really quick. Doctrine and Covenants 94. The Lord gives a commandment relative to the erection of a house for the work of the presidency. So, I mean, this is like in the scriptures. Now, in this case, it's talking about the context is this is the Kirtland period of the church. So, and I'll show you that in just a minute. And then it says a printing house is to be built. Certain inheritances are assigned. Okay, verse 3. And let the first lot on the south be consecrated unto me for the building of a house for the presidency, for the work of the presidency in obtaining revelations, and for the work of the ministry of the presidency in all things pertaining to the church and kingdom. All right, let's take a look and see what that looks like. On the Joseph Smith Papers website, you have the city plat for Kirtland, and this is similar to the city plat for New Jerusalem or the city of Zion. We'll look at that in just a second. But the Kirtland Temple is this one right here. It's the one on the north. That's the temple. And then what we just read about would be for the next lot to the south, which is currently just a bunch of trees and a walkway and stuff like that. So this is this middle one would have been the one for this essentially would have been the church administration building. It seems to me that they were all going to be temples, or they would all at least look the same. I mean, you can see it right here, how they drew the doors and the windows and stuff, and they all look identical. So the one on the south, that would have been for the first presidency. Let's continue. Verily I say unto you that it shall be built 55 by 65 feet in the width thereof, and in the length thereof in the inner court. And there shall be a lower court and a higher court, according to the pattern which shall be given unto you hereafter. Now, that's not talking about the Kirtland Temple. That's talking about this house for the presidency. So it sounds like at least the basic layout would have been the same as the Kirtland Temple. Maybe there would be some variation, but this whole idea of like a lower court and upper court, and I'd have to double check, but I think the dimensions are the same when it's talking about 55 by 65 feet. I did a video about that like a couple weeks ago. And then later on, in verse 7, and it shall be wholly dedicated unto the Lord for the work of the presidency. And then in verse 10, And again, verily I say unto you, the second lot on the south shall be dedicated unto me for the building of a house unto me, for the work of the printing of the translation of my scriptures, and all things whatsoever I shall command you. And it shall be 55 by 65 feet in the width thereof and the length thereof in the inner court, and there shall be a lower and a higher court. And you can see that third building right here. This is essentially where the visitor center is today. So if everything had gone according to plan, if the saints hadn't been driven out, you would have had, at least on the outside, I believe, 3 identical buildings, one being the main temple, or what we would think of as the Kirtland temple, and then a building for the presidency, kind of like an administration building, and this like printing house right here. Now, this is similar to New Jerusalem, but in this case, there were going to be 24 temples in 2 blocks, okay? And yes, these are temples. You can see it here on the Joseph Smith papers. I'm looking at the revised city plat, but there's the original one from a few months before. And it gives you the names of these temples. It's still kind of unclear exactly how they would have been used, but I went ahead and I transcribed it on here on my spreadsheet. You have the ones in the east for the Aaronic priesthood, the ones in the west for the Melchizedek priesthood, and each set of 3 would correspond with a different office of the priesthood. Like these ones right here in column J would be for deacons, teachers, priests, and I believe this would be for like bishops. And then likewise for the Melchizedek priesthood, yeah, you would have elders. This one is the Holy Evangelical House for the high priesthood. I think that'd be like patriarchs. The Sacred Apostolic Repository for the use of the bishop. So you have the word apostolic in there, but also bishop. And then the main temples, and I think the primary of which would be number 11, although maybe it's supposed to be the one that's furthest north, like Kirtland. I don't know. But this one, these 3 are designated House of the Lord for the presidency of the high and most holy priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, which was after the order of the Son of God upon Mount Zion, city of the New Jerusalem. Okay, so when we look at Salt Lake City, we don't have a 24 temple complex, and we don't have like a 3 identical buildings like Kirtland, but we do have the Salt Lake Temple, and then you have various buildings on these 2 blocks that have different purposes. You have the Relief Society building right here, and right now we're talking about the church administration building. So, and originally, Brigham Young was starting to lay out Salt Lake City, kind of following the pattern of New Jerusalem, but for practical purposes, it changed. But you can see how this was essentially patterned after New Jerusalem, right? And no, Salt Lake City is not going to become the New Jerusalem. Go to my spreadsheet called Quotes, Common Misconceptions. President Nelson himself, in a recent book that he published, talks about that fact. He talks about Jackson County. That's still the plan. But I think that Salt Lake will be in use for a while. I think it'll be in use into the millennium. But anyway, that's beyond the scope of this video. Okay, so these are important things to understand as we're talking about this, okay? Okay, so alluding to Doctrine and Covenants 94, 3 through 12, Nilsson said the building fulfilled an 1833 commandment that, now notice he says commandment, not prophecy, commandment that there be a house for the presidency. The idea of a centralized place where the first presidency would have its offices or have its office dates all the way back to the Kirtland period, he said. Because of their poverty, they weren't able to realize it, and it took the administration of Joseph F. Smith 84 years later to fulfill that original commandment. That's interesting to think about. This was supposed to be built, these were supposed to be built, but eventually this was built, and it was a long time afterward. So this is a very special building. It's not a temple, but you can see its history. Okay. Emily Utt, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, historic sites curator for the church history department, said one of the structures erected in Salt Lake City in 1852 was a governor's office, which in 1853 became the church president's office for Brigham Young. Quote, that was church headquarters until 1917. Before that time, she said, every member of the 12 would need to find his own office somewhere. Can you believe that? All the way until 1917. It doesn't seem like it'd be that hard, but I guess it was. I guess they couldn't do it. Some of them would rent space in one of the office buildings on Main Street. Some would, some would just turn their front parlor into an office, but they were spread out. By 1884, the idea of having a complex of buildings where the church administration building now stands was considered. It would have included offices, meeting rooms, and places for public gatherings, but would have necessitated the raising of the Beehive House and Lion House. So that's just right over here to the east of the church administration building. These right here, Brigham Young's houses. Okay, continuing. Quote, I'm so grateful they didn't, Nilsson said. But after the turn of the century, they decided they needed to bring a number of functions together. In a general conference talk in April 1917, President Joseph F. Smith, while talking about the completion of what is today the church administration building, spoke of those early days. Quote, as you know, for the last 60-odd years, the church has had its headquarters in the little old buildings, which were erected by President Brigham Young way back in the early 1850s, and which at the time served the purpose very well, and have continued to do so until now. Still, they have become worn with age and not quite in keeping with the progress of things, end quote. Okay, so they built the church administration building. It was constructed of the rock commonly known as temple granite and quarried from the mouth of Little Cottonwood Canyon in the mountains east of the Salt Lake Valley. The same stone from which was constructed the Salt Lake Temple, the federal building in downtown Salt Lake City, and much later, the LDS Conference Center. I like the idea, Nilsson said, that you can look at the temple and the church administration building near it and see that they are built from the same granite. It gives the message that it's the same priesthood that brings these two buildings together. Yeah, so that's pretty neat. Construction commenced in 1913, and by February 1917, the building was ready for occupation, first by the Genealogical Society and the church historian's office, which occupied the top level of the 5-story structure. As distinctive as it was not dedicated upon completion. That was for a combination of reasons, Nilsson said. One was the influenza epidemic of 1917, which forced the cancellation of public gatherings, including General Conference. Other reasons were the mourning by President Smith for the death of his son and the church president's own declining health. Not until 1974 would the building finally be dedicated. That year, President Spencer W. Kimball wanted to rededicate the building following renovations, but researchers in the church's historical department informed him that a first dedication had never been held. Quote, so President Kimball said, well, now's the time to finally dedicate the building, end quote, Nielsen related. Known as the church office building until an adjacent 26-story high-rise was completed in 1972 and given that name. The church administration building, quote, was the first effort to bring all of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and the First Presidency into one building, end quote, Utz said. So that's interesting too. It used to be called the church office building, and I have never known it by that name. To me, the church office building has always been this building right here. My dad worked here for a while. He was a software engineer, but then he was him and his office, I guess, was relocated to Riverton, off the Binghamton Highway. But anyway, so that's pretty neat. I didn't know that. There's more stuff though. Okay. So every member of the 12 had a corner office, with the administrative offices and areas in between explained. So that's really neat. They all have a corner office. I feel like that's almost symbolic as well if you think of just the building. And there's so much like imagery in the scriptures of the world, the four corners of the world. And when we think about temples, when their cornerstones are laid. So I don't know, it's just really neat that their offices are in the corner of the building. That remains true today with the 12 occupying offices on the 2nd through 4th floors. 21, which is 3 sevens, other general authorities have offices in the building, including the 7 members of the Presidency of the 70 and other general authority 70s. On the main level are the offices of President Thomas S. Monson and his 2 counselors in the First Presidency, President Henry B. Eyring and President Dieter F. Uchtdorf. And this is really interesting. There's a shofar right here. So this is President Monson's office before he passed away. And he has this shofar that has Jerusalem on it. And then there's like a menorah up here. And I don't know what that is above Jerusalem. Maybe it's like the city skyline or something like that. So I'd like to know the story behind that. Because just earlier this month, it was Elder Anderson that was in South America. And he was with a Jewish rabbi. And the rabbi gave him a shofar to blow. And that was a very interesting thing. Okay. Also, on the first Wednesday of most months, the First Presidency meets in that room with the quorum of the 12 apostles, the Presidency of the 70, and the presiding bishopric. So I don't know that I knew that before. The first Wednesday of most months, you have all these presidencies that gather. You have the First Presidency, Presidency of the 70, presiding bishopric, and then the 12 apostles, the quorum of the 12. Quote, "It's a report meeting where they talk about who has traveled where, what they found, and what they learned," explained Brooke P. Hales, secretary to the First Presidency. And I feel like it's in these type of meetings that some of these like phrases and scriptures that start to pop up. Like when I, with my spreadsheet called timeline phrases, sometimes you'll have these scriptures or phrases or terms that just kind of seem to come out of nowhere. And it's not necessarily from a previous general conference talk. It doesn't seem. Things just kind of like, and I think they come from these type of meetings. Like maybe President Nelson shares a scripture and then it inspires the rest of them to maybe include it in their talk or bring it up sometime. Okay, quote, "Through the years, whenever they've had a VIP visitor, he or she would come here," Brother Hales said. "Guests have included such former United States presidents as George Bush, George W. Bush, and Ronald Reagan, former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, numerous other heads of state from many lands, and celebrities who performed with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir." And we've seen a lot of President Nelson meeting with different dignitaries. I've done videos about that. Elder Rasband talked about that fact that he is basically meeting more with more people than his predecessors. Okay, let's continue. Okay, now here we go. The adjacent Onyx Room is named for the onyx stone that characterizes it, obtained near Manti, Utah, and used extensively in the temple in that city. In that room is a small cabinet displaying a few of the numerous gifts that have been brought to the First Presidency by visitors from all over the world. So here's that display. But this is the Onyx Room. It seems like it's just kind of like a, I don't know, like a waiting room or something like that. I'm not exactly sure what it is. And I don't know that it's necessarily that significant, but in light of what we were talking about, how onyx seems to represent Joseph, well, we know that right now the church is being led by Ephraim. It's mostly Ephraim and Manasseh that's performing the gathering. Now we do have other, I wasn't thinking about showing this, but we do know that we have other tribes with us. I know that because I've done this poll. This is an anonymous poll. What tribe are you from? Based on your patriarchal blessing. And it looks like a few more people have taken the poll because now we're at 1,409 responses. But you can break it down. In the number 1 spot is Ephraim, and then after that, Manasseh. And then you have Joseph, because some people, their lineage is not declared through Ephraim or Manasseh for some reason, just through Joseph. Benjamin, Judah, and again, I don't know the reason for this, but some people just have their lineage declared through Abraham, but not through Israel. I don't know why. I have 7 of those. Levi, Asher, Dan. Asher's gone up. Asher was like down here before. There's more Asher than before. Dan, Gad, blank, which, okay. Reuben, Naphtali, or Naphtali, however you want to pronounce it, Issachar, Simeon, and Zebulun. So if everybody answered this truthfully, out of these 1,409 people, that's what we have. And this would only represent my audience, which is an English-speaking audience. So I wish I could see the entire church. That would be really interesting to see. But it's the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, that I believe makes up most of the church. I'm sure that's the case, but again, I'd like to see what it's like overseas, especially in places like Ukraine and Russia and some of those Eastern European countries. But so I just think that's interesting. You have this like Onyx Room, and maybe it was just kind of like a design choice. Maybe they were just like, oh, let's have a nice appearance for this room, so let's go with onyx. Let's tie this in with Manti or something like that. There's one interesting thing about Manti that I've shared before. We're looking at my quotes A through Z spreadsheet for Manti, Utah Temple, currently on row 259. And if we go to the oldest quote, the older quotes are to the right, more recent ones are to the left. We have this one from Warren S. Snow, who was a brigadier general in the Nauvoo Legion. You can find this in the book called Life of Heber C. Kimball, published 1888 by Orson F. Whitney. And we're looking at pages 446 to 447. I'm just going to read this part down here. So he was with Brigham Young, okay? And this is in Manti. President Brigham Young asked Brother Warren S. Snow to go with him to the Temple Hill. Brother Snow says, "We two were alone. President Young took me to the spot where the temple was to stand. We went to the southeast corner, and President Young said, 'Here's the spot where the prophet Moroni stood and dedicated this piece of land for a temple site. And that is the reason why the location is made here, and we can't move it from this spot. And if you and I are the only persons that come here at high noon today, we will dedicate this ground.'" So, here's like another, well, I don't know it's a piece to the puzzle, but, you have onyx that comes from Manti, and the Manti Utah Temple, it says, uses it extensively. And, well, the headquarters of the church is in Utah, and the work of the gathering and the running of the church is primarily run by Ephraim and Manasseh. So maybe it is fitting that the church administration building has a room called the Onyx Room, I can't speak to this, but when we look at the scriptures and it's talking about these different lands, now this is before Adam and Eve are cast out of the Garden of Eden, but it's talking about the different rivers and where the rivers go. And it says the name of the first is Pison, I think it's Pison. That is which compasseth the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. There is bdellium and the onyx stone. I mean, is that a river anciently that could have come out west to Utah? I don't know. Is that where the onyx stone was? Like, wouldn't that be really interesting? Because in our theology, The Garden of Eden was in Jackson County, Missouri, right here. That's why New Jerusalem is going to be built there. And that's why it's not going to change, because it's a very, very, very sacred location. This is where our first parents came from. After they were driven out, they went up to Adam-on-Diamond up here near Gallatin and Jameson. So, could there have been a river anciently or something? Could that verse be talking about like over here where there's bdellium? I don't know. We know there's a lot of gold, or there was gold in California. You had the California gold rush. I don't know. I'm not a big scriptural geography person. I really, when it comes down to it, I don't really care. I think it's interesting, but I don't really care. I'm just saying that'd be really cool. That'd be really cool if that's the onyx that's being referred to, but I'm not saying that. So please don't freak out. So here you go, the Onyx Room. Okay, there's another room called the Pillar Room because of its distinctive marble pillars. It goes on to talk about that rug. It is in the Pillar Room where the bodies of deceased church presidents have lain in state for public viewing prior to their funerals. This was the tradition until the death of President Gordon B. Hinckley, whose viewing was held in the conference center. And then there's the West Boardroom, this right here. And I'm not going to go over all of this. I'll leave the link for the article in the description box below in case you want to check it out. Located on the upper floors are a council room, newly refurbished with a new table where the quorum of the 12 apostles meet at least twice a week. So the quorum of the 12 twice a week in this room with this really cool circular table. Okay, now talking about this room right here. A nondescript but important part of the building are the two identical rooms adjacent to each other, each containing two large computer screens. In each room, a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles sits with an aide from the missionary department. These rooms are where assignments for new missionaries are made before the calls are sent to the missionaries. On that screen, the missionaries' application papers. On the other screen are missions. Okay. On one screen, the missionaries' application papers. On the other screen are missions where assignments need to be made. Under inspiration, the apostle makes his decision for each missionary whose application he views. These days, the rooms are used almost daily because so many missionaries are being called and assigned. And that's the case right now as well. I can't remember off the top of my head, but because there's a surge in people going on their missions, I know that they've had to at least add another apostle because the workload is just so much. We read that somewhere. I think it was earlier this year. So that's neat. So that's what that room looks like. It's just like it says, a nondescript, just kind of room. Oh, and it has a painting of Christ and the Ascension and the apostles who were afterwards supposed to take the gospel to all the world. So that's good. For 100 years, the church administration building has been a home base for prophets, seers, and revelators. In the early 20th century, it helped the Church of Jesus Christ come out of obscurity into the modern age. Today, it helps the church meet the demands placed on a growing global faith charged with preparing the world for the coming of Jesus Christ in glory. And that's how it ends. Aside from these additional pictures. So I like that. There were a couple things. So this is President Monson's office, and this is the painting that hung behind him. President Nelson, the painting that he chose is the one of Christ and his triumphal entry, with the people, waving the palms. And we've talked about that extensively, especially in that general conference. I think it was April general conference of last year, where Palm Sunday was the big theme. And we were thinking about how that's a foreshadowing of the second coming, where that's where he was being recognized as Messiah by many. And essentially being accepted by a king as many. And if things had gone right, like if everybody was righteous, then he could have began his political kingdom there, right then and there. But of course, that's not how things were going to go. And so the second coming is going to be like a parallel event. It's going to be much grander. And we did that Hosanna shout in the April 2020 General Conference, which I can't help but to wonder if that was us, waving our palm fronds, welcoming him as King of the world. I guess we'll see. Here's just another view of it. I don't know what that painting is. It's clearly like a waterfall and pine trees and a mountain. If anyone knows the story behind that painting, let me know. And then just some other stuff. Here's President Henry B. Eyring's office. And I noticed this picture back here, and I looked it up. It's this picture when he met the Pope. So President Nelson was the first president of the church to meet with the Pope one-on-one. That happened in 2019. But before that, this was published on the 17th of November, 2014. And you have President Eyring that was there for this event. So I don't know how many other church leaders have ever met with the Pope. I don't know if this was like a first. It doesn't say in this article. Pope Francis greets President Henry B. Eyring in the Synod Hall at Vatican City as a colloquium on marriage begins. Religious leaders and scholars representing 14 faith traditions from 23 countries assembled at the Vatican November 17th to 19th, 2024, in a historic gathering hosted by the Catholic Church to discuss how men and women complement each other in marriage. So it's interesting. He has this, I don't know if he still does, but he had it up in his office at the time that this article was published. Was there anything else that I had? Can't remember. Of course, this is Elder Uchtdorf's desk. Well, at the time, President Uchtdorf's desk with the airplane right there. There were so many pictures taken. Basically, every nook and cranny of this building is in this article. I think this is the Onyx Room again. There's this. What is this? The Onyx Room. Oh, yeah, just another view of the Onyx Room. Sorry. So many. Look at all these pictures. I mean, I applaud whoever did this. The more, the better. I hate it when there's not enough. Not enough photos, not enough information. So I think it's great. All right. Well, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. Like this video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.